Okay, welcome everybody, and this is Group Two's presentation. They're going to be talking about osteopathic medicine. Lucky them, they get to be a bit of a guinea pig for this since they have not seen how these presentations work. But from what I can tell, they're going to do a great job. So I'll go ahead and turn the time on over to you guys.
All right, so I guess I'll go ahead and start. Like you said, we're doing osteopathic medicine. I think most of us could say that we chose that mostly because we didn't know anything about osteopathic medicine. We wanted to learn more. So if you want to go ahead and go to that next slide. Perfect. So on that American Osteopathic Association's website, they said that osteopathic medicine focuses on the whole person, the relationship of the body's nerves, muscles, bones, and organs, and the body's innate ability to heal itself. So in general, the difference between a medical doctor and an osteopathic physician would be that instead of treating one specific illness, although they can do that too, their goal is to reach that high level of wellness. I think I said that later as well. But they're trying to create a healthy person overall and to help the body heal itself rather than doing everything for it. And those are going to be called DOs. They're osteopathic physicians, osteopathic doctors, osteopaths, whatever you want to call them. And that's the equivalent term to an MD or a medical doctor. So it's the same amount of schooling, same level of knowledge. So they train differently. But if you were to go into an ER and get either one, then you would get basically the same treatment. You could be sure that either one would be able to do their job just fine. And they are licensed just like medical doctors. They can prescribe medication, perform medical examinations, or even perform surgeries depending on what their specialty is, what they studied for, but they can do all the same things. Usually you would consider a DO to be able to do some extra on top of what an MD can do, but that baseline is still the same. And like I said, that high level of wellness, and then they also practice osteopathic manipulation that I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide, but it's kind of like what a chiropractor does. So if you go to that next one, that was my last one. So I think I said somewhere on there, yeah, that osteopathic manipulation is going to be like your bone cracking, making sure that your bones are in alignment. And they deal a lot with your nerves and all those kind of things. And like I said, that the schooling is very similar, but they are completely different schools. So you won't be able to go to the same school and study to be one or the other usually. It's going to be either entirely an osteopathic school or entirely a medical school. But same amount of schooling, it's that 8 years, that undergrad and then medical school and then your residency. And because they do that osteopathic manipulative treatment, sometimes they work in specific fields where that's going to be a little bit more valued, like in what was an example, sports medicine, something where you're going to be dealing with injuries to the body or, like stretching, making sure that you don't injure yourself, that kind of thing. And as time has gone on, the differences between a DO and an MD have kind of become more and more slight because they are licensed the same. Normally, a DO will get a job, just a normal one, like any MD would do. They sometimes will practice, that osteopathic manipulative treatment, but a lot of times they won't do anything differently. And one other thing why there would be a second degree is just that it makes it so there's more schools. If you add together the amount of medical schools and the osteopathic medical colleges, then there's going to be more opportunities. So lots of people will apply to both and kind of just see what they get into. So that was my last slide. If you want to go and get to whoever was next.
Okay, so the history of osteopathic medicine. This is actually really cool. The founder of osteopathic medicine was Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. He was a physician in the 1980s, and he kind of watched 3 of his children die from spinal meningitis. So I think that's what kind of triggered him to think about a better way to practice medicine and to care for his patients. He believed that he believed in the body's inherent ability to heal itself. So that's why he came up with this kind of medicine, which uses methods to allow him to practice medicine with little or no use of drugs. So that was a really big reason. And he founded the first osteopathic school in Kirksville, Missouri in 19 in 1892. I keep saying 19, but it's 1892. If you want to go ahead and go to the other slide. So a little breakdown of the training between doctors and medical doctors and doctors of osteopath. As Haley said, it's kind of, as we go on throughout the years, there's kind of like not very much difference between the two, but you just need to know that the training is not the same. Okay, they same things, but the training that they go through and some of the schools that they attend are pretty much different. Medical doctors kind of have a classical form of medicine. They practice a classical form of medicine that focuses on the diagnosis and treatment of the human diseases. So your medical doctor is basically, you come to the office and they look at your signs and symptoms, they diagnose you, and they treat you, whether it's medication or whatever it is. And doctors of osteopath, they have a more holistic view of medicine, which kind of focuses on seeing the patient as a whole person in order to reach a diagnosis. And as Haley said before, they kind of practice this osteopathic manipulative medicine. And this is one of the trainings that they get that is totally different from what the medical doctors get. And it's using different kind of techniques, and it's hands-on care that involves like using their hands to diagnose, treat, prevent illness, stuff like that. They would move your muscles, your joints, stretch you out, apply pressure, gentle pressure, resistance, stuff like that, in order to treat or alleviate your illnesses or injuries that you may present. If you want to go ahead to the next slide. Okay, schools throughout the U.S. So the American Osteopathic Association's Commission on Osteopathic College Accreditation. That is a lot. Anyway, so there are 33 accredited osteopathic schools throughout the U.S. 48 teaching locations in 31 states. 6 of the colleges are publicly controlled and 27 are private institutions. So I wanted to figure out what that was. So I kind of think the private institution part of that would be something like BYU Idaho, that they're not funded by the state or something like that. And the publicly controlled are funded by the states. So if you want to go ahead to the other slide, I have a little map on that one that kind of shows you the different locations throughout the U.S. of these schools. And a really cool fact about this is that some of these osteopathic schools share campuses with medical doctor schools, like medical schools. So it's like on one side there's schools for medical doctors, and then the other side is doctors of osteopath. So I was thinking maybe you like, oh, I don't want to be a medical doctor anymore, and then you just walk over to the doctor of osteopath part and just become an osteopath or something like that. But these are all the schools, the accredited schools throughout the U.S. And that's it for me.
Going off of this slide more, it's actually really interesting to see that you stepped into a university which is focusing on osteopathic medicine. The average MCAT score is around the 25, whereas a school that focuses on like to become an MD, the average is 31. So I thought it was interesting that DOs, they care less about like more of the MCAT score and more about like what you're doing in the environment, like public service and other things besides just the grades. They want to see you being like the whole package, more as just the grades. And then also it's cool to see that we were talking about the manipulation techniques, and to become a DO, it takes about 200 extra hours on top of that to learn that extra training. So they actually do more schooling, it says, than the MD, which is really interesting. And then the last thing that I found here about like the differences between DOs and MDs is DOs usually go into like your family practices or like your just local doctors, whereas your MDs are usually the ones that focus on like certain areas like dermatology or cardiology or orthopedics. And then Also, it's interesting to see that DOs tend to practice in rural areas, um, like states like South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, North Carolina, Minnesota, even like Idaho. And MDs usually go to like bigger inner city areas, which I thought was interesting. I think you can go to the next slide now.
So as far as MDs and osteopaths are concerned, they usually have a mutual respect for each other, although their techniques differ. Like we were talking about before, MDs study allopathic medicine, where osteopaths go to study osteopathic medicine. But they do study the same science curriculum, so they're both well acquainted with the human body, and generally they all care about the health of their patients, and that's their number one concern. You can go to the next slide. So becoming an osteopath, many medical students decide to become osteopaths rather than MDs because of the holistic approach to medicine. It's mostly just preference, thinking of how people think of the body. The important difference between them is, like we've been saying, is that the MDs typically just treat the symptoms of an injury or disease and not focus on the patient as a whole. They're interested in making the symptoms go away, or making the whatever is ailing them go away, not necessarily in the way that osteopaths are focusing on prevention of injury and disease and improving the wellness of the patient. So personally, it makes sense to me that people out in the country would want to focus on the whole body, because it seems like people that live there are more in tune with themselves and with nature and just that osteopathic medicine in general. So we can go to the next slide.
All right, so this is my slide. So just going over the principal figures and how osteopathic medicine developed. Obviously, Andrew Still was the doctor who first founded the medicine, the practice, and he, like was mentioned before, he had some children who died from meningitis, and he felt the need to do this, and so he founded the first school in 1892, opened it up. And then we'll talk a little bit later of what happened with the Flexner report after that. But another principal figure that helped support and kind of solidify osteopathic medicine was actually Mark Twain. In 1909, he was a vocal supporter of osteopathic medicine and actually received care from osteopathic doctors, and was able to promote that in the public eye. And then a really big change, this is when the federal government kind of recognized DOs as equivalent to MDs, at least in the military, was in 1966, and that was done by Robert McNamara. I'm not sure how you say his name. He was the Secretary of Defense, and he was able to kind of, he made it so DOs in the military were treated equally as MDs, and that was really good. And then someone just kind of important, the first DO that was appointed as a Surgeon General for the U.S. Army in 1996 was Ronald Blank. So let's go on to the next slide. Now this one's really cool. I loved researching the Abraham Flexner report because before this point, I guess I'll explain what the Abraham Flexner was. It was originally called, it was originally called the Carnegie Foundation Bulletin number 4. And what happened is that the American Medical Association saw that there was hundreds of schools that were not being regulated on what they could and couldn't teach as far as a medical school is concerned. So anybody and anybody could go and pay a certain amount of money and become a medical doctor, theoretically. But some of these schools were not very good. They weren't training their doctors to be real physicians. And so the American Medical Association asked the Carnegie Foundation to go out and do a study of all the schools. And so the Carnegie Foundation chose Abraham Flexner to go ahead and do a curriculum of all the schools. And he modeled the criteria after European schools. I'm not exactly sure why, but he took a lot of the requirements from medical schools over in Europe and applied them here. So before the Abraham Flexner report, there was 155 medical school. They had few prerequisites. They weren't necessarily science-based, and there was no regulations. After that point, however, Abraham Flexner went out and he said he was highly critical, and he said these schools shouldn't be practicing, and he also said that certain schools should be practicing, that this school is a model of what we want it to be. One of the schools that he said that about was Johns Hopkins, and as we know today, Johns Hopkins is still a really good school for medicine. So after Abraham Flexner did his report, by 1935, it went from 155 schools to 66 schools, and the state government now regulated who could like become a medical school and those requirements, and it's all based in the scientific method / in research, the gold standard, which from what I understand is it has to be peer-reviewed journals. All the techniques need to be checked and verified before they're like taught. And then it also went to 68 years of formal training. And now before you even get into college, you have extensive prerequisites. Like I'm sure all those studying pre-med know, you need lots of science-based courses, and you need a good foundation in biology, physics, chemistry before you can even apply. So it was a great move forward in the way we approached medicine. And most schools that were not MD schools actually died out, but the DO schools were able to match the criteria and therefore were able to continue to exist. Hence why we really only have accredited DO and MD schools and not other schools like holistic medicine or other things like that, naturopaths, as like recognized American Medical Association schools. And that's it for my slide.
Is that it for you guys then?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, perfect. Very good job. So as I mentioned before we start recording, we'll just do a quick question and answer. So feel free to all unmute yourselves, and whoever would like to just chime in with an answer, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so let's just start out with, in your research from what you saw, did any of you realize that your doctor or your child's doctor, whatever else, was actually a DO that you didn't even assume or know was thought maybe was an MD?
I still didn't even think to check that.
I actually worked with a doctor this past summer that was a DO, and I had no idea what it meant until this assignment. So that was pretty interesting.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wish that my son's pediatrician was a DO. I can see the difference. He had a lot of symptoms that I thought were along the lines of allergies, but he only looked at the symptoms of it and was giving him tons of antibiotics and prescribing tons of antibiotics for him before he was 2. And I wish he would have thought like a DO, or would have been a DO, to think about my son's whole body and recognize that they were symptoms resulting from his allergies that he had.
Good
so
point.
I appreciate the difference.
Yeah, so that's going to lead me to my next question. Would learning that your primary physician or ER doctor is either a DO or an MD, would that alter your opinion, or do you feel like the difference between the two isn't enough to, say, change doctors?
I would definitely want to find, like, we're going to move pretty soon, and I've got to find him a new doctor, and I'm definitely going to look for a DO.
I don't know if I would change doctors if I already had one that I really liked, but if I was, out there searching for a new doctor already, then I think I would probably look at DOs first.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Something that needs to be mentioned, I'm a pre-med and I'm looking at MD or DO schools, is that typically DO schools are private owned and MD schools are run by universities, and sometimes, like, for example, University of Utah has an MD school but no DO school. So you usually have private schools that are DOs. And the good thing and the bad thing with that people should know is that if you are a pre-med student, oftentimes you want to get into MD schools because they're cheaper if you can get in-state tuition. If you go out of state, it's kind of a new scenario, but usually DO schools are more expensive because they're private loan and they're for profit and things like that, and they don't get state subsidized stuff. So typically the medical student that goes into a DO school versus an MD school is of a different, maybe their GPA wasn't higher or other things, or maybe they really want to be a DO. There's lots of students like me that I'm really drawn towards DO school rather than MD school. But that's just something to take note of when you're deciding.
Yeah, very good point. I was going to point that out as well, and you did that very well. Just typically your osteopathic medicine schools will be a little bit more money than just your traditional MD school. Along with that, and as you guys mentioned in the presentation just barely, that typically your MCAT score can be lower and your GPA can be lower as well to get into a DO school. So those are two things you want to weigh as you're looking at, if you're one who's looking at pre-med as an option for you and choosing one or the other. I've got a brother-in-law, and he was accepted to a number of both DO schools and MD schools, and he ultimately chose DO school for a variety of different reasons. So I think one of the big emphasis that you'll see if you're looking into medical school one way or the other is, more than anything, it's the residency that you get into. If you're looking to specialize in something, whether it's dermatology or emergency medicine, family practice, whatever it is, that residency is the big one. And so, when we talk about once you graduate from medical school one way or the other, they don't care so much about if you're a DO or MD. They care more about where you did your residency, maybe your fellowship as well. And so that's more of an emphasis. Now, the only thing that I want to put a little caveat to that is, typically it's a little bit easier to get into the residency of your choice if you're feeding through an MD school versus a DO school. So yeah, there's a pros and cons for each of them. And I think, like what you guys all alluded to, once you're through and once you've gone through residency, on the tail end, there's not a big difference in the way that the medicine's practiced. Maybe the approach to it might be a little bit different too. So very good for all accounts. I think I've grilled you just enough. Do any of you want to add anything more before we let you all go?
No.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, well, you did a very, very good job. I appreciate it. I can tell you put a good amount of work into it, and it shows very well. So I'll let you all enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.